his trip to Gaza. He was there during Operation Pillar of Cloud. And just before we get started, do you just want to talk a bit about your educational background or what inspired you to do what you do today?
Well, I mean, basically I studied politics, economics, and French. But I would say that this doesn't really particularly actually inform my work. I mean, I started caring about the situation in Palestine when I was about 16, when I read a book by British-Australian investigative journalist John Pilger. I don't know if you know him, but in the UK he's got quite a high acclaim. And in one of his most recent books, he talks about the treatment and humiliation of Palestinians in the West Bank. And this really resonated with me. And so I always knew that it was really wrong what was going on, and etc. And then actually it was really going to a couple of talks, actually, kind of like the ones I'm now doing in Canada, that basically pushed me to go and visit. And so within 3 months of a particular talk, I ended up in the West Bank. Obviously I just got back from my second trip to Gaza.
So having a European background, do you think that benefited you at all?
I guess it helps me. I mean, I guess kind of the videos I'm making in the journalism, etc., if you like, I'm a kind of foreign correspondent, because I'm not trying to be Palestinian or something like this. I'm trying to report what's going on back from the point of view of a British guy from Oxford, back to an English language Western world. This is the audience that needs to hear what's going on, and I'm one of a few journalists of my background that go. So this is kind of addressing the imbalance. So yeah.
And what makes you different from other journalists is basically you document what the majority would call the truth. Do you think that would ever put you in danger, or has it before?
I mean, during the war, I managed to take care of myself pretty good by basically doing what all the Palestinians generally do, which is stay in their home, which their people's homes are their bomb shelters, because there are no bomb shelters in Gaza, and many people's homes don't even have roofs. But I stayed at home in one of the safest areas of Gaza during the war. But even this does not give you guaranteed security, and also as a journalist, you can't imprison yourself at home. It's obviously impossible to work under those circumstances. So we were required, me and my team were required to put ourselves in danger to an extent just to even be journalists, which says something about the nature of the recent war. But it is dangerous. I mean, Israel has a track record of trying to target the truth. I mean, if you take, for example, the International Maritime Aid Flotilla of May 2010, the Mavi Marmara and the other vessels that were attacked in international waters, Israel purposefully and systematically trying to destroy all of the evidence, even just by tearing up people's SD cards. And so, I mean, historically there's been basically barring of journalists going into Gaza, the sealing of the Gaza Strip from journalists entering, etc. So the point is that trying to combat that deficit of reporting is dangerous, because you're basically sticking up, even by being in Gaza, basically you're sticking up for a largely defenseless, displaced third world people, basically.
Oh, does anybody in Israel, like, do they know who you are?
You mean like the state?
And what they do, like, yeah.
I mean, since I've been to Gaza, I have not tried to get into Israel. And when I try, we'll see if they let me in. It's probably 99% chance, statistically speaking, that they won't. Because if you go into Gaza through the Egyptian authorities circumventing the Israeli border, Israel resents this, number one. And number two, if you're a campaigner or activist or campaigning journalist or anything like this, Israel also resents that. So a friend of mine, for example, he spent less than 2 weeks in the Gaza Strip recently. He was barred from Israel for 10 years, as that was his punishment for going to Gaza. So the precedent is that I don't really stand a great chance of being led into Israel. But you know, I have Israeli friends as well as Palestinian friends, and of course they know what I'm doing, and I have Israeli followers and etc. So I have connections with Israel as well as Gaza. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it did.
Okay.
Okay, so how was it like, or how did it feel documenting for thousands of eagerly people just dying to know what's going on?
I mean, actually, it was an enormous responsibility, and I mean, of course, it was absolutely exhausting and fatiguing, because it was 8 days and it was basically non-stop, basically working alone most of the time. And actually the thing that kept me going was the fact that obviously psychologically I had to try and do something constructive under the terrible conditions, horrendous conditions. I mean, I say it with a kind of small smile on my face because you have to an extent actually disconnect from the reality of the suffering that you're placed in order to psychologically deal with it. But so I was able to psychologically divert myself and do something constructive by reporting full time every minute that I was awake. And at the same time I would get, as you alluded to, hundreds of thousands of messages of people asking me to carry on. So then I felt no small responsibility. So I mean, I already felt a responsibility being one of the few native British English speakers there, journalists. But then actually asking, with hundreds or thousands of people asking me to carry on. Yeah, I mean, it really, I mean, practically it meant that I slept less, basically, worked more.
It was worth it.
I hope so, I think so. I mean, from what people have said, that, I mean, basically, now I've been in 4 different countries outside of UK and Egypt and Gaza, and, people have come to me and they said, basically almost they start crying before they even start talking to me. Thank you for reporting, because if you hadn't done it, we wouldn't have actually known what was going on, which is quite, mind-blowing, I think, really. I guess.
And how did it feel experiencing this firsthand, or seeing the sites that you saw?
Well, I mean, it was horrendous. I mean, it's difficult to, I mean, we're in London, Ontario, and it doesn't really quite, we are in Ontario, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't quite, resonate talking about 59 children killed in less than 8 days and etc. And, massacres and airstrikes and drones flying over your home and stuff, because it actually feels like being in a different planet. But it's actually not. It's basically 10 hours flight away, or actually less than that. But it was a horrendous experience. I mean, when we visited the hospitals, most of the people that were coming in were not really people, they were children. And we visited airstrike sites of extreme danger to ourselves and etc. And I remember, for example, in one case, for me this was just symbolic, and actually I haven't told anyone about this before, but I was the only person that had gone to the aftermath of one particular airstrike site where apparently Israel had blown up a resistance fighter, or near a supposed military site. And I was documenting the aftermath of the airstrike and the crater and the structural damage around, for example. And there was at least one little, it was almost like a Labrador, like a little baby puppy, that had basically been caught underneath some shrapnel and trees and metal, and was basically not only stuck but also partially paralyzed. And he was obviously you can imagine wimping out and etc. And I was trying to see if anything we could do to actually get him out of this trap. At the same time, Palestinians are screaming at me in the area saying what the hell are you doing? You're trying to get yourself blown up. Because going to the airstrike sites, is extremely dangerous, because Israel has a policy of second wave attacking sites that's already struck. So this makes it very difficult to document. But the reason why I said this is because this is a small animal. But for me this was symbolic because of of the tragedy of the whole thing, which is basically difficult to talk about. I mean, people I think cannot really imagine what it's like. Most people in Gaza lost a family member in their, if not immediate, extended family. And from the previous war, Operation Qasr in winter 2009, almost 1% of the population was just wiped off the map. So the point is that everyone is affected by tragedy, and even myself, I'm not even Palestinian or Israeli. And a friend of mine was killed during the 8 days. So it's, I mean, to me, speaking clinically, it's clearly state terrorism actually what happened, because the effect is to terrorize a civilian population. Most of the population of Gaza are children. Most of them are refugees, and most of them don't even have enough money so they can provide food for themselves. And then Israel's using F-15, F-16s, drones, gun helicopters, and etc., gunships. It's just insane. I mean, it reminds me of the testimony of one of the Israeli soldiers that served during that previous war I was talking about. It's like ants on sand, and you've got a mirror, and you're shining the sunbeam onto the ants burning alive. And this is what they admitted their experience was of operating in Gaza on the ground. But really, this time there wasn't a ground invasion, but that's basically what it was like. I mean, Israel basically went with basic, total international immunity, legal immunity, if not diplomatic immunity. What price has Israel paid for starting this aggressive operation in Gaza? Basically, not really any.
And I know in a recent interview, and I'm just going to look here because I don't want to say anything incorrectly, you talk about Hamas accepting Israel's practical right to exist and how this charter has changed for the past 20 years now, but many people don't know about that.
It's not that Hamas accepts the right to exist. Actually, Hamas is ambivalent on that, and I don't think particularly that's of any significance. The point is that they accept the practical existence of Israel. I mean, this may sound like a little bit of a joke, actually, but let's say, for example, a couple have a baby by accident, which they didn't expect. They have to accept that the baby has come, and the fact that it's now their responsibility, and Israel is now the responsibility of the world, etc., whether they intended it or not, or whether it was a legitimate child or not. So the point is that Hamas's policy originally was very aggressive against Israel's existence and the occupiers and etc. But over time, that has, if you like, mellowed, so that today the actual policy is that they will accept the state of Israel existing as a fact, but they won't accept the moral legitimacy of its creation. And if you tell the average Western person the history of Israel's creation, they also will not agree with the moral legitimacy of Israel's creation. If you tell them the actual history, I'm talking about the Palestinian narrative as well as the Israeli narrative. The War of Independence of 1948 from the Israeli narrative, and the Nakba, the catastrophe, from the Palestinian perspective. Most people will say, well, look, that's not looking great for the Palestinians. They basically have their land stolen. So I think that actually the whole thing about whether it's legitimate or etc., is a propaganda red herring. If you take, for example, a point that Norman Finkelstein made, and he's quite a famous American Jew that speaks for Palestinian rights, he makes the point that Gandhi had the same position towards the India situation, that he did not accept the moral legitimacy initially, but the point is practically accepting it, and that's actually what matters for peace.
Also, this is one of the longest ongoing conflicts, I think, that's happening in the world right now. Do you think that the information, like, from generation to generation is kind of going to change?
Well, I think it already is changing, and I think that Israel is basically running out of time, and that's why it's relying on increasingly sophisticated propaganda techniques. Actually, it's not really winning the propaganda war anymore, because the point is that it's kind of a country out of strategic control. I mean, for example, the recent operation was actually counter-objective, if that's the right, this is jet lag, excuse me. It's actually counter-military objective for Israel. And so it's, to the world, increasingly obviously not acting in its own interest, or the interest of its neighbors, or the world and world order, or international law, the most objective, neutral thing. So, I mean, let's take, for example, the most important milestones that most people in the world are aware of who know about foreign relations, etc. The 2006 Israeli treatment of the Lebanon. The 2008-9 winter Operation Castor, the treatment of Gaza, white phosphorus. Most of those killed were civilians, hundreds of children. People know this a little bit. If they don't know it factually, they know it at least subconsciously, sentimentally. They know that what happened was wrong. They know that it wasn't justified, that Israel went too far, things like this. Then we had the 2010 May flotilla I was talking about, with the massacre of some Turkish people. And then we had the increasingly obvious colonization of the West Bank, which is illegal under 5 minutes notice. And also, most recently, also the 8-day war. People are increasingly fed up of this, real actions against Israel's neighbors. And also, of course, the covert war against Iran, which is somewhat more out of the spotlight, but some people are aware of this as well. So I see that over time, people our age are being subjected to increasing information information, which shows the actual real dynamic of what's going on. So I'm actually very hopeful.
But the media is obviously shielding a lot of information. So do you think that, because that's where most people go for their information, what can we do to maintain the truth?
Well, the first is to, in a way, subvert that system by trying to pressure it to act in a kind of humane way. And number two, also create and use the external system. And I'm talking about alternative media and social media. And I think social media is more important than alternative media as distinct categories, because social media has the ability to say, well, this is personal for me. Now, it may sound like a joke, but I'm sharing this on my wall. Let's say, for example, the demolition of the Palestinians' home in the West Bank. That means that I care about it. That's why I'm sharing it, in a way. And so it's actually very impactful, social news and etc. And so supporting the sources of social news, citizen, independent, alternative, and some good fringe mainstream journalists, that's the way it's going. And increasingly people are just fed up of the quite obviously stale mainstream news system and looking for a more organic and, if you like, democratic news, which they're finding on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube.
Do you think a lot of people are taking that sort of stance, though? Because I personally, I don't know many Westerners that are interested in documenting in Gaza or standing up for the people of Palestine.
Do you know, I make the distinction between consumers and producers. I mean, I don't think there are many producers, although they are increasing in number because of access to technology and stuff like this. But it's the consumers which is the fundamental, because there have always been independent journalists and etc. But now they have a way of getting to the world and getting large viewership numbers. And so it's that people want to consume independent stuff, which is the key, in my opinion. And I'm not rose-tinted spectacles about this. Obviously, most people are not accessing social news. They're accessing mainstream news increasingly through social media. But that means that they will automatically, over time, increasingly get the, if you like, democratic people's news infiltrating that system. So the independent journalists will eventually seep into people's lives, I believe. And that is happening. And actually it's happening at a very hopeful and inspiring rate, actually.
And why do you think the media actually doesn't cover some conflicts or stories in particular?
Well, it's because of biases and because of ideology. And basically every state and corporate news channel or media organization has its own bias in some way, shape or form. And usually it's quite easy to detect what it is. Obviously, for a stupid example, Fox News is obviously an aggressive neoliberal war-hungry news channel. That's the ideology. That influences all of the reporting. But in more nuanced ways, all news organizations are like this to an extent, corporate and state-run, or state-influenced. That's another important category, actually, because in the BBC we have, in the UK we have, for example, the BBC, which is not state-owned, but it's state-influenced, because the board of the BBC, for example, is basically industrial and political elite. It's not in any way the people. And so, in many cases, the kind of nuanced, good-looking examples are actually, in a way, more sophisticated, if you like, state and corporate news agencies. And so I think people are increasingly critically aware and cynical and aware that they're not looking at good news, something which they feel that they can't trust. And I think over time we'll see an acceleration in people's uptake of alternative news.
Or they'll shift more to technology and they'll find their information online.
I believe exactly that. Yeah, exactly. This was what I mean. Like people increasingly getting their news from, let's say, for example, for the Canadian example, the Real News Network, for example, which is an online, actually is one of the English language world's only viewer-supported online full-time news channels. It's just on YouTube. It's actually not yet on satellite, but it's extremely strong in terms of reporting. So people will increasingly rely on this, in my opinion.
And so I know you've gone to South Africa to raise awareness for HIV/AIDS, and of course
after the tour, I'm actually going to go straight back to Gaza and make more reports there. And I have some kind of strategic projects that I want to set up to do with the media there, actually. Because actually my work there is not sustainable. I mean, obviously one day I will die. I mean, I hope the conflict will be fixed before I die, but the point is that there have to be sustainable means of making a media impact from Gaza. I want to try and help bolster efforts there and help coordinate such efforts. And in July, I'm taking a convoy of internationals to Gaza. So if you like, this is the campaigning role. It's so important for people to see what is going on. I mean, look, I'm one eyewitness. I was there for 12 weeks last year, and I've been going all around the world because people are so desperate to hear eyewitness testimony. If you send another 100 people there, then there's 100 more delegates. So the actual eyewitness accounts are so important in my view, Western eyewitness accounts, because people can relate to their own. So yeah, so these are some of the things which, some of the plates which are spinning. But I also aspire to making a feature film actually in Gaza as well. And actually moving on to other conflicts in the next year as well, actually.
Good luck.
Thank you. Sorry to ramble, it's the jet lag actually.
Oh no, it's all good. And I know you have many young followers, I guess, like myself. What are some advice that you would give to them?
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, I guess I'd like to take this opportunity to say, well, that actually, I'm just an ordinary guy that just went to Gaza and just did what felt natural to me, which was reporting what was going on and documenting what was going on. Basically, most of the skills I developed, I taught myself, just by working hard at teaching the skills to myself. And actually, I want to say that doing the kind of reporting that I'm doing is something that really anyone can do, actually. It's just a matter of going and doing it. And so I hope that that message is inspiring and makes people feel hopeful that, or encouraged that they can also go to Gaza and other conflict zones. And, you know, my God, there are other conflict zones to look at. And feel that they can do something. Because 9 months ago, you know, no one was following me. You know, it's just the way life is. But the point is, anyone can do it. That's really important. And I think, in terms of being able to do it with some, you know, with goodness, it's really important to stay by your morals and not be corrupted by commercial, corporate news, the corporate news system, because that is a very long and dark tunnel to go down. And so, staying economically independent, even if it means financing yourself independently, is really important. And actually, my biggest recommendation is just to start. Because if you take just to start reporting, making content, you know, campaigning journalism, whatever you want to call it, is just a start. Because if you think about it in this way, there is such a deficit in good reporting that even if you start reporting and you're really, really bad at it, it's still going to be a hell of a lot better than those reports not existing at all. So, you see what I mean? So, people should feel encouraged, I think, just to go and start and feel excited that the new technologies that we have around us and, you know, available to us in the West, and really use them, actually, and be excited by social media and the ability to make the world so small. You know, my God, it is so small these days, the world.
And do you have a specific message that you want to get across? Like, what is the core reason for your talks?
There are many reasons, but the point is that various people have asked me to give talks in, for example, Canada, and I think face-to-face contact is important. And as a result of doing these talks, I've been able to recruit, if you like, dozens of people who are committed to going to Gaza in the next 11 months. And that is actually really important to me, because I see that as strategically extremely important. Because Gaza, in comparison to the other bit of Palestine, the West Bank, bit that's left, is relatively starved of international solidarity, presence, and really dedicated eyewitness trips, visits. And so for me, that's been one of the primary accomplishments. But really opening the eyes of people who didn't know anything about the Israel-Palestine conflict at all, who have seen the event publicity and who have come along, and getting people engaged and activated, increasing the numbers of people who are willing to do something, albeit spend 1 minute a day doing something on Facebook, really activating people in this way. So these have been the real fruits. Actually the receptiveness of the various audiences around Europe and North America has been incredible. In quality and quantity, the audiences have been incredible, which I think is really inspiring. You know, people go out in the evening to go and hear about wars halfway across the world. I mean, by a Western context, that is incredibly inspiring, I think. So it's trying to educate, to activate, and inspire others to go, basically.
And in regards to visiting Gaza, I know it's a very lengthy process, and there is, on your website, I saw exactly what you had to go through, and it was very long. But just what are some of the conflicts or issues that face? Or, for example, how would I get there if I wanted to go?
Well, you have a Canadian passport, so actually this is fairly easy for you to go. Also, because you're visibly Muslim, it's also even quicker for you to go, maybe 5 minutes quicker.
You're from the UK, wasn't it supposed to be easy for you too?
No, I mean, I'm making a little bit joke about the visibly religious thing. The main points is that you are basically indebted to the Egyptians because you have to go through Egypt, basically. And you have to bureaucratically apply for permission to use the Egyptian crossing. And a Western guy like me basically will end up facing more delays than a Palestinian, which is obviously fair. And someone that doesn't look visibly Muslim will also spend slightly more delays as well. But the point is, generally, it's a very easy process. It's a matter of following the rules and etc. and applying in the right way, which basically anyone can do, getting the permission from Egypt and going into Gaza. It's actually very simple. And in comparison to, for example, going to Israel, it's comparatively, a cup of tea, actually.
Even like for me?
You mean going to Gaza?
To Israel.
I mean, I think, to be honest, going to Israel for you is going to be actually some sort of hell on earth, actually, because you're wearing a hijab, a headscarf. And they do socioeconomic profiling, racial profiling, obviously religious profiling, family profiling, the whole thing. So, yeah.
And do you just have anything to add before we finish up?
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. And if you want any more information about Harry Fear, please search his YouTube videos at Harry Fear